So today is our Saturday and half moon Wampa. Been reflecting a little bit more recently about training and practicing in a monastery as a monk and what that means. Over the Vasa period, this is a time when the monastics will engage in our classes that revolve around our rules and the rules that we follow. And although they're, 2 hours of class, usually they're sometimes lasting till 9 p.m., a little after, they can seem a little bit daunting, but there's just always something new to learn, and I find them quite helpful, and also just with the questions that are asked, it's very rejuvenating to think about the practice and realize that there's things that are always new, things that can be learned. And especially what I find is things that for myself, I will question, say, that's something I haven't thought about in a while. That would be good to try to have a more watchful eye in my practice, how I engage with my body and speech, or how the mind leads to some way that can be an unwholesome direction, lead to unwholesome speech or actions, and could cause later regret. Or the opposite, reflecting on the wholesome directions that cause more peace and calm and happiness. So I've been thinking just lately around, as I mentioned, training and the engagement we have as monastics here, what we're doing, also the engagement just as anyone who's interested in the Buddha's teachings. It's really the same thing. So something that's come up for me more recently is just reflecting on this second noble truth, that the cause of dukkha is desire, and how helpful that is to bring up in what it is that we're doing just every day. So if there's a potential attitude that says, I'm not a really desirous person, I don't have a lot of desires, they don't really cause me many problems, and that's very good for you, but it's possible you're not examining things more deeply. Because if you're still suffering, then there must be desire there. And I had an opportunity to see this, must have been a couple of weeks ago, I think, when I got very excited about an object of desire I had. And this object of desire is very helpful for me to reflect on, because I think 2 years ago I really didn't care about this, and I've talked about this in several Dhamma talks, but this object of desire was some free trees that were going to be offered to the monastery. And I particularly liked these trees, and I got very excited about it. And in my mind what arose, because I'm helping Tanrakita with the garden that's here in the monastery that we've had over the last couple of years. I think it's been five years now. What's arisen is this desire to kind of invest my time and energy into, I would just say more, just creating more of whatever it is in the garden. And so how that manifests itself is just that something like that, something that I really might have not even noticed or cared about a couple of years previously just becomes a manifesting desire in the mind that it just makes complete sense to me. How could there be any other way than having these free, nice gifts? These were older trees. They weren't brand new things, and how great it would be. So, of course, what went out the door was that the previous 2 weeks, Tanrakito had gone on retreat, and I was spending about 3.5 hours a day watering the garden, and I got a lot of walking in, but it was it was stressful because I have other duties in the monastery. So there was just all day of just kind of work. And I was finding that I was enjoying part of it though, so it was still had a wholesome sense to it, but it was dragging. I could see that there was less of an ability for me to hold it in my mind in a way that was completely beneficial. So, of course, when we have objects of desire that we want, things that we want and we see, we're often blinded by them. We can't see that there's actually a downside. There's going to be some more responsibility. There's going to be something, whatever it is that we get. There's usually something, if we want it badly enough, that we're just not seeing on the other side. This is why the Buddha really encouraged this sense of yoniso manasikara, wise attention. So we can deliberate and try to understand, there's always another side to something. And I would say this hasn't been a completely successful endeavor for me in understanding this, but what occurred was that this was moving in the direction that I wanted until, I hope Ajahn Cunda is okay with this, I'm mentioning it, but he said, actually, I think we shouldn't accept these trees. And it was like, that kind of stereotypical, like record scratching across, the needle kind of scratching across the record and everything stopping for a moment in silence. And my heart was beating, and I thought, what? What? These are trees of peace. What are you talking about? We have to accept these gifts. These are...
Actually, you said why.
Oh, I said why. Why? So, why is a little bit. So, why is a bit nicer than what, I guess. But still, there was this shock. There was this kind of sense of how could this be possible? And Ajahn Cunda reminded me, well, weren't you just saying that you were spending all this time watering all these plants in the garden and how tiring that was? And I said, well, yes, but, these are free. Like, well, they're free, but aren't they still going to need being taken care of? Well, no, they're drought tolerant, they're older, we don't really have to put much time to them. Oh, really? Like the first year or two, you're not going to have to, well, okay, the first year or two, yes. And so this conversation was continuing, and I was seeing the writing on the wall, that Ajahn Cunda was making it quite evident that I could push my way into this, but it probably wasn't going to be the most skillful thing to do. And luckily, something clicked in my mind, and I just said, well, okay, I can let go of this if you want me to let go of this. And he said, thank you. Although I don't know if that was completely honest. But I think the honesty was that I would endeavor to let go of it. And there was a little difficulty because immediately then I went into the proliferation. So that means never, we can't plant anything again, and we can't ever accept anything again, it's over. And I don't think Ajahn Cunda meant that. But what he did mean was, hey, you need to take a pause on this. This isn't forever, it's just right now, there's desire, and it's not being checked. And the interesting thing is, as most of you know how this goes, when our desire is frustrated, we then have to deal with our mind in that state. and how difficult that could be. And I'm very thankful for Ajahn, not because we don't have the olive trees right now, but more because I had this desire highlighted, and I wouldn't have seen it. I would have just seen, get the trees, plant them, and another thing Ajahn says, well, when's it going to end? And I would have smartly said, well, a garden never ends, you know. So the point is at the time that he said it, the desire wasn't ending, it was just continuing on. And whether it was these olive trees, there would just be another something or other later on. So again, this wasn't a permanent thing in my mind, but it was just, hey, you need to put a stop to this right now, pause on this now. And why that's helpful is that one of the things about being in a monastery is as you do get more senior, you get less of this kind of feedback. And so it's just a natural kind of thing that occurs. And it's not necessarily a good thing, but if one's to ignore the feedback that we get, if I was to ignore this and not see that it was actually quite a nice gem that I was receiving from Ajahn, then it wouldn't be helpful to actually reflect and see, like, well, how am I holding this? How am I looking at my own desire, or am I not seeing it at all? And how easy it is for us not to see our own desires, what it is that we particularly want to have, the direction that we want our life to go in, the timing, whatever it might be. We all have our own personal desires that we want, the things that we hold in our mind. And in this example, I think it's good because it's obviously there are all kinds of sides that were being missed by me in this situation, but the immediate response was like, not fair, not okay, not fair, not right. And the reason for that is because the desire was so strong. It was so, it was placed in such a situation where there was just complete blindness to it. There wasn't any way to see it clearly. And of course, it's fairly innocent enough. I mean, wanting trees is not the end of the world, but it's unchecked desire that is the end of the world. And that's where we have to continually be able to rise up and see these things in our own minds. Because if we are honest with ourselves, if we're still suffering, then it's because we have these desires. And if we're not seeing them, then we're not able to actually understand this second noble truth. We can't see them because sometimes we're just getting our desires met, and that can mask dukkha in a way. And so what seems sometimes ironic is that somebody would sign up for a life of this, would really be interested in the Buddhist practice, because it's so much goes away from the direction of the world. As any of us drives into a city, we see just billboards explaining to us, hey, desire is fine. It's okay to just have it unchecked. Just move into it and satisfy whatever your desire is. That's what the good is. Hedonism is great. Getting what you want is the best. That's what we're told all the time, but it takes its toll on us, and it can exhaust us. So we do need our friends, our kalyanamitta, and we have to be careful of those kalyanamitta that are encouraging us to just get what we want, do what we want, have what we want, because those aren't true kalyanamitta. Someone who's a kalyanamitta is willing to actually show us that something that we want it's going to be painful, but it's something that we need to let go of. And that's why a spiritual friend is so important, because they're willing to do something that is difficult to do. They're willing to say something that is painful. They're willing to encourage us to move in a direction that we don't want to actually move in the short term. But our spiritual friend knows that in the long term, that's the direction that we are wanting to head in. And so they can help us with that, and we want to rely on that. Our first Kalyanamitta are usually our parents, and as children we learn this role of having this helpful, protective person. For the most part, not all of us have this, but many of us had parents that were looking after us, and they knew when we were headed in the wrong direction, they would need to correct that. So we're quite used to this, but then when we can, we want to leave that situation, and we want to eventually get what we want, live on our own, live under our own roof. And on the desires can go. So it's just very important to be careful with this, and to try to highlight in our own lives. Well, what are the desires that are helpful for me? What are those things that are not leading me in the direction of further craving and attachment? And for each of us, it's kind of our own habits that we need to look into. But we can ask others for support in seeing those things. And so we can often look at these desires, and as I mentioned before, this word yoniso manasikara, or wise attention, skillful attention. It's a way to kind of look at your own movements of mind and examine, like, well, what's the flip side? What's the actual way of attending correctly to the situation, so that I can see if there's dukkha on the other side. And in the example that I'm giving, it's not always obvious, it's not always clear, because the mind can be fooling us. Our desires can be fooling us. We can say, my desire is correct. It's right, the way I want to do something. And so in the monastery, this training that we have here, it's really encouraging us to let go of that, to have a sense of, oh, maybe what it is that I want isn't always the best thing for myself. And when others point that out, no matter how painful it is something that can be considered a gem. It can be something that is, it's sort of the tough medicine to swallow. But when we realize we do take it down, then we see that it's medicine, it's beneficial for us. It can heal us and help us if we're able to take it in. And there's so many opportunities throughout our day to examine this. Whenever you have that sense that something just isn't right. Ajahn Cunda in his morning reflection the other day was just saying, the easiest translation of dukkha is, you want something to be other than what it is. You're not okay with the way something is going. And that's the feeling of dukkha. It can be the clothes you're wearing, the temperature, the people that you live with. Sounds, whatever it might be. We're just in a way, permanently perturbed by whatever is. But it's not permanent. That's what the Buddha is teaching. He said, hey, it's actually not something that you have to be subjugated to. There is a way out. And so the way out is to see that we have these desires and they're not always good for us to follow. And so as I began the talk, I was talking a little bit about how it is that we take up something that can have absolutely no interest. And that's what I've found is the most fascinating element of how desire works, is it's just the mind just all of a sudden becomes obsessed about something. It takes an interest in something, and then that interest gains momentum, and like a train that is slowly moving, we might not notice its movement at first. We can't even necessarily notice that we're moving until we start to see the other objects slowly receding behind us. Oh, I guess I am moving. But that took a lot of inertia to get that movement going. And then once it's going, it takes an enormous amount of inertia to get it to stop. And so we have to be also very careful about what it is that we have desires for, because they can move us in directions that we're unable to extricate ourselves from very easily. And so for everyone who's listening to this, you can think about your own desires. What is it that you particularly want to have happen? What is it that you are interested in? And has that actually been causing the kind of problems that I'm talking about? You can ask yourself, well, what happens if that's taken away? I can't get this thing that I want. I can't be with this person I want to be with. I can't get the job that I want. Or this project that I have, it's just ended just like that. It's over. So we can examine that in our own lives, and we don't actually have to have a spiritual friend, but it's very helpful. So we can check in with others, but it's also helpful for us to check in with ourselves. What are those things that we keep wanting, but don't provide us with long-term happiness? The happiness that the Buddha was teaching about. And so the interesting aspect of that is when we're honest with ourselves and we do confront a desire, then we have a choice of how to temper it. It's not like we have to necessarily end something. I don't have to go into the garden and torch all the plants and then say, oh, okay, my desire's gone now, I'm not having anything more to do with the garden and it's destroyed anyway. It's just a sense of how do you pull back, or how do you witness, how do you see that desire that you have might not be helpful to you. So for me in this situation, if Ajahn Cunda had not said anything, then when I had this offer, rather than just going with, of course, this is the perfect thing. Of course, there can't be anything wrong with this. Then I could have moved in a different direction. Oh, well, let me think about that. Or the other error, which I haven't mentioned yet, is that I did something also that was quite problematic, that my desire led me to, and that was I did not consult my partner, who was Tanrakito, who was actually the true gardener. I'm just his assistant. And that was the other problem, is that the desire led to just forgetting, oh right, I need to communicate about this. So anytime we see that something is all good, that's where trouble is. When our desire leads us to say like, oh, there's nothing wrong with this. It can only lead to happiness. Well, mostly we're probably right if we're talking about the Dhamma, but when it comes to other things outside of that, we're probably moving in the wrong direction, because there's always a downside. And even with Dhamma practice, that's the same. The Buddha gives so many examples of when somebody practices in a too slack of a way or too intense of a way, and it ends up being in the wrong direction. They're not seeing things clearly. So when we learn to check our desire, it's not about annihilating them. It's not about the Buddha really warned about that, being careful of that mind state of annihilation, and that sense of vibhava tanha, just end it, get out of here. But how do we really temper our desires? And we do. We put that pause in. That's what it is. We just say, maybe this isn't the right thing right now. I'm not sure. And because we have encountered the Buddha's teachings, we have a method for how to explore that, for how to look into our own desires and see if, at least from an understanding of our own reflection, whether they're going to lead in a potentially a positive direction or not. And that's where we use our own wisdom. We can try to remind ourselves, oh, well, has this been leading in a good direction or not? This thing that I want, when I've had something like this before, is it truly for my long-term welfare and happiness? And like I said, the desire can be so strong that there's a rejection of that. Of course it will. These are trees of peace. But actually, they were probably going to be trees of agony. And it was the mind that was lying. It was that bhavatanha, that kind of sense of, I'm going to have these things, I'm going to get these things, I'll be happy. That just sense of becoming I had around it that wasn't being seen clearly. And so it's important to relate to this as well in our own practice with the Dhamma. How do we set that up? How do we set ourselves up with our own practice? And we see like, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm a terrible meditator. I really have to get better. I'm going to do these certain practices. And then we start grasping on to things because, again, we're just leading towards desire. So even with the Dhamma, we can head in the wrong directions. So we have to be very careful. We always have to note our own desires, and we have to see whether they're really wholesome or not. So I've been reflecting on this in regards to our dear friend Metika, who is right now dying, and thinking about her life. And you know, she's been in a spiritual life for a long time, engaging with her Buddhist practice for a very long time, and she has a long history of that. Time with different teachers, time in India, and different teachers in America, and different practices, and just seeing her kind of at the end of her life now, and letting go. There is peace there, and I can say, okay, this is kind of a similar direction that I would like to go in. I don't want to die in a way that I'm going to have many regrets about the way I handled my own desires, the way I handled my own spiritual life. And so it comes down to how do I deal with my own particular desires? How can I encourage myself to move towards peace rather than distraction and a worldly sense of getting what I want? Because all of us, we're all heading in this same direction. Each of us will have a death that is different, but for many of us, there will be an end that might not come just all at once. There might be a time where we realize this is the end, that our life is ending, And when that occurs, how do we really want that to be for ourselves? And if we do want to be at peace, if we do want to die without regret, sadness, discontent, then it's really now that we focus on our practice, our doings, our own desires. We try to understand how it is that we get ourselves into trouble and how to extricate ourselves from that. And so this is a daily practice. If we just think about these as sort of grand endeavors we do just when we're on retreat, then we're not really understanding what the Buddha's teachings are. It's every day, it's every moment that we can. We recollect, we try to understand the intention of our own minds. We try to discern for ourselves what it is, what direction is that we're moving in. And we learn to have our own wisdom in that regard. And so this monastic training encourages that as well, that we live with each other and kind of rub up against each other, and it can be kind of painful at times. Some of the encouragements we have, or the having to face our own truth. We live with a bunch of mirrors, others who are reflecting our own wholesome or unwholesome intentions. So it's very important to try to welcome these and try to understand, like, oh, even though there's pain there, it's this bitter medicine that we know is ultimately good for us. So it's 9:00, and I've had a longer week, so I want to kind of just dedicate this talk to Metika and her life and the goodness that she's brought to the world, her own teachings. She's been a teacher in her own right, and encourage everyone here just to look at that potential for seeing our own desire, understanding it, and seeing if what we think is going to really lead us to peace is really moving us in that direction. Ewang.